Welcome in, everybody. First live event, going over Accubid Anywhere, specifically this database here tonight. A couple cleanup items from the beginning on the YouTube page. Don't forget to subscribe. We're going to do these live events from time to time. So best way to get notified is to subscribe, and then you will be able to tune in every time we do this. This first live event is really going to be about a database that we have here. The upcoming ones will be more tips and tricks and stuff like that with Anywhere, and also getting into probably live count stuff eventually. But it's going to be a whole solution and a Q&A. And speaking of that, there's a couple other things. Join our LinkedIn page. We'll have a link in the chat coming up. So follow that page too. We post things there. These various live events we will post when they come online. So that's a good place to follow, which that is in the chat there now. And also our Discord. We have a Discord. If you don't know what Discord is, ask your kids, grandkids, whoever you got around. They'll definitely know what it is. Our industry really doesn't get into that too much, but hopefully we can change that. That's cool because then you can interact with us. You can call in. So eventually, hopefully, when we get these troubleshooting sessions going, we get more subscribers on board, then you can actually call in with different scenarios and questions you have. We can actually talk and interact, and that's really cool how you can do that as well. So that's pretty exciting. So that's two things, the LinkedIn and the Discord, both ways to get in touch and interact. So that's a good thing to know about. The other thing on our main YouTube page, we also have for the future donate button there. So when we get rolling and people want to support the channel, you can with that. So that's just another housekeeping tool there. And also the chat, which you can see, it should be to the right of the screen. You can send questions there. That's kind of why we did the Discord, though. If you want to ask a question, and depending on how busy the chat gets different times as we get going, we might not see that. The chat while the live stream is going, sometimes, again, that can get hectic to monitor. So you can join our Discord, ask questions in there. And then, again, future plan is join the Discord, ask questions, and then hopefully join in for calls and stuff like that, which will be fun to do. So if anybody has any questions about any of that stuff, post them in the chat there, and I'm sure somebody can help you out with that. All right, so let's get started with what we're looking at here on the screen. This is an Accubid Anywhere database, as the banner says up above. This is something that is for sale. So if you recently transitioned to Accubid Anywhere, that would be an ideal situation there if you're rather new to it. Also, if you're still on Classic and you're about to transition to Accubid Anywhere, I would say this is a very ideal option for you. It would definitely save you a lot of implementation time for sure. Because that's the struggle we find that a lot of contractors have, is you start down the road of implementing this software, and soon after that you typically find that it gets very complex to manage. You end up sinking a lot of money into it, and then the result at the end isn't what you're expecting anyway. So a lot of people then look for another solution, which has been this solution for a lot of people. So we're up to quite a few people we support with this, and it's gone very well. So I would encourage anybody out there that's on the fence with the transition from Accubid Classic over to this. I would say in the past that was a difficult task, but with this solution, it definitely makes it a lot easier. So let's dive into what this thing's all about. And again, this session is going to be, our starting point about this specific database, but future plans are we're just going to encompass all the tricks and tips and just general estimating practices with the software, common things that you might run into, and then again, even getting into live count and stuff like that. So it is going to be a full kind of circle, but you got to start somewhere. So this is kind of it. So what we have here, let's go back to the beginning here on our dashboard. We do have on the project schedule templates. So this comes with an estimate template and a PCO template right out of the box. So that's the first hurdle that a lot of companies face when they implement this is you want a company standard. You want all the systems to be uniform and consistent throughout the company, and this is a way to accomplish that. And the premise here is you would copy this template every time you started a new estimate. So really each new estimate should start with a copy of this template. So that's kind of where all that begins. Let's go back over to this project I got. So this estimate here is that starting point with the template. And what you get with that is the systems list here, which we've got about 50 or so systems. Most of them are your common ones, which we can go down through a couple of these, like receptacle devices for an example. The systems list is what are you about to do is typically the question you want to ask yourself here. And anything that you're about to take off, there's a solution here to not only get the system, but the takeoff pad associated with it that presents all the assemblies and items that you would typically need to accomplish that task. So you'll see here, receptacle devices, we've got all the different options here. All the assemblies in this database are pre-built. They have all the correct questions you would typically want for flexibility. That's another thing that this database has to offer is just ultimate flexibility, I would say, because it's got pretty much everything you would need to be thought through right out of the gate. So I'm going to put my filter on this. So I've taken off a couple devices here. Let me open one of these up, and you'll just see the questions. Right here. And then off to the right, I will mention, we've also induced really a tutorial as you go here as well. So that image to the right is really telling you how to use this database right out of the gate. So that's really a tutorial image there. It's saying to get this assembly to work, you have to put your branch spec up top here and then the device spec down below. Because the folks that bought this database, that's really the hurdle that you're faced with. Just like anything new, you don't necessarily know how to use it. It is built in a unique fashion, so even though you bought the solution, you still have to get comfortable with it and know how to use it. So we try to help you out by, explaining how some of these work, and then you don't have any issues. So for this assembly here, you can see you've got a number of receptacles, so that's how many gangs you have in the box. So one would be a duplex, two would be double duplex. Conduit size. So one thing to point out here is you can switch from conduit to MC cable easily. And that's what that does. 3/8 signifies MC cable. And then you could select conduit sizes. And then all the other questions here, drop length. So if you didn't want to drop length going vertical, you could make that 0. Or even if you were going from receptacle to receptacle in the stud wall, I would still be inclined to probably make this 4 feet or something like that, because you do have to go up typically to get into the slots of the metal stud. So I still would actually put a drop length there to some degree, but just not 12. And then the device specification there, and you have labeling options, so pretty much all of that covered. And all these things are flexible. So let me give you a quick demonstration on this. So at the bottom banner there, I am boldly saying your classic is holding you back. Time for an upgrade. So what I'm about to do here is pretty much an example of where a comment like that would come from. So what we can do here that certainly classic could not do, and I'll always say that the people that are on classic, not really transitioning to anywhere yet, I get it. You're typically comfortable with it, but then when you start seeing things like what we're about to do here, there's always a weighted decision of, do I want to make a change? How disruptive will that be to the business? And human nature always will allow us to stay with what's comfortable, but that's what you have to judge is that comfort actually costing you time and efforts and all of that? And most of the time when you're dealing with classic versus anywhere here, the answer is yes. You're not fulfilling all of the benefits that you could have by switching to something like this, and then you probably are doing things a little more inefficiently, which is costing you money and time. So I'm going to select all these assemblies, and this could be 8 assemblies like I got here, or it could be 80 assemblies, or it could be 800 assemblies. So that's the point to this. There's no limit to that. So that's where the power really comes into play, is you can do it with any amount. So let's say I took this off as 3/8. I've got an MC cable going from the device up vertically with this scenario. Somebody reads the specs and says, hey, do you realize in this one section it says that you cannot use MC cable? Well, obviously we've already counted everything. Now I would say I'm not sure there's a good option at the assembly level to switch something like this in classic. Now at the item level you can do power substitution, stuff like that, but I'd say it's easier what we're about to do. I can just right click this, do update global variable. This question is, what variable do you want to change? I want to change conduit size. Let's say we discovered the minimum was 3/4. Okay, make it 3/4 and just hit OK, and it swaps them all. And then if I look inside of here, it changed the conduit, all the straps, everything. So that was a pretty easy lift. So that's why I personally buy into this system, because the flexibility like this is, in my mind, second to none. You can't really do a heavy lift like that so easily with anything out there that I've found. Now, with that said, if you buy anywhere out of the box and you get stuck with the out of the box database, it doesn't necessarily do all of this stuff. So that's the advantage why we found a place in the market for the needs of a database like this, because this is what people would hope that a new database that had this kind of power would do. But the reality is the default one just is not designed to do a lot of this stuff, because let's face it, it was built by software people, and this database was built by an estimator, and you can tell the difference. It's pretty much hands down difference. Let me skip back over here to designations. So you'll notice a theme here too. In designations, I have a company standards folder, and also over in the main database, which we'll go look at in a second, we'll go back over to that takeoff screen. there's also a company standard folder there. So I've basically abandoned any of the Accubid defaults because, like I was just saying, most of the default stuff in this out-of-the-box database is garbage. I didn't even try to use it. This particular database has been literally built from the ground up. So all the Accubid defaults are still here. I just labeled them as such, like Accubid template designations. And then all these company standard ones are ones that I've built from the ground up for, I guess, everybody's use. That is, if you were to purchase this, and let's just look inside of here real quick. So this is the lighting and lighting control, all pre-built. You can see all the different themes. You got troffers, recessed rounds, and inside of each of these are all the specific ones. So you've got 1x4s, 2x2s, 2x4s, so it goes on and on. So in all of these folders, there's options for everything and all pre-built. So very rarely are you going to have to build at least the common stuff from scratch. So that just saves you a ton of time right there. All of this is pre-built. Also down here in distribution, we've got switchboards, motor control centers, and again, inside of each of those is the actual assemblies of various amperages. And even if you have higher amperages than this or lower, it's super easy to modify. All you got to do is copy and paste it and modify it. The main crux of this is it's already built. Yes, you may have to modify some amperages here and there, but it's already there. And that's really all you're doing is modifying, but very rarely are you building, at least the common stuff. We've got distribution panels here, lighting and appliance panels, single can, double can, you name it. So designations galore, tons of them. Let's go back over to Takeoff here. And then database. So this is the other part I wanted to mention here. So you'll see what we did here. The default database has spec-driven assemblies and non-spec-driven assemblies. That to me was pretty confusing. I didn't really want to go down that path. So much like the designations, we have the company standard right here. You toggle that down. There is a method to the madness here. At the top, it starts off with what I would call unique assemblies that really just broad stroke over several types of systems and different disciplines that you might do. A good example is like this branch conduit. Branch conduit could be lighting branch, receptacle branch, power circuits, mechanical. So pretty much can do a lot of things. So the general stuff is up here on top. This underground site work is another good example. It's just duct banks, manholes, underground stuff, which again could be all kinds of stuff. Communications conduits, secondary services, all kinds of different things you could use that stuff for. So the general stuff is up top that really doesn't apply to a specific thing. But then you get down, the numbers are numbered exactly like over here in the systems list. So you'll notice those are very unique to each other. So 9, you can see here, 10 panel boards, there's 10, 11 is transformers, same over there. The reason why this is done is because some people don't like the takeoff pads. So that's my stance. I don't need to force people to work one way or the other, but I wanted consistency between the two no matter which way you choose to work. So whether somebody's picking the numeric version of the system or the numeric version of the global assemblies list, you're ultimately going to get to the same assembly anyway. So it really doesn't matter how you work. But what does matter is the consistency of these numbers and which system you pick that is consistent, whether you look over there or over here on the folders. So let's just pick another one to look at here, like disconnects here. So the reality is, over here on the right, 1 through 13 are what we have in the disconnects and enclosed circuit breakers, starters, and VFDs. And the reason I made that previous comment is because whether you pick 1 through 13 from this folder or you pick it from the takeoff pad, that's irrelevant because these are just hyperlinked to the takeoff pads anyway. So that's the ultimate point, is you're going to get to the same assembly no matter where you pick it from. So that's why it really doesn't matter where you actually grab it. But I do like the takeoff pad, so let's go back over there. And then I'm going to go to the transformer pad. Let's take a look at that. So here's just another example of, if you're going to do transformers, these are all your basic pad mount transformers, I guess what I would call interior transformers. We do have the version with primary and secondary connections. So if you wanted to include conduit and wire, you could. I personally not a big fan of those. I typically use this up top. It also has a note, see number 44, grounding, for transformer grounding. So there are assemblies for the grounding as well, but again, my belief as far as building this, the grounding should always stay in the grounding system, so I would take off the transformer here, the grounding under 44. So if we kind of hyperlink there, you can see here's all the different transformer grounds there, and under grounding where it should be. So that's kind of the stance there. All right, so let's go back over to feeders here. And I have some feeders up in here. All right, so let's do this too. Let's see what I've got here. So this is EMT. So this is another case where, let's do this update global variable thing again. Let's say I had an addendum come out, and for whatever reason this conduit changed from 2.5 to, say, 3 inch, just for the heck of it. They wanted a little extra room in there. And you can actually toggle this down again and look and see we've got all 2.5. So the conduit, couplings, the strut strap, we got some connectors, elbows, all the miscellaneous stuff. So I can highlight that all once again. Update global variable. I can say I want to change conduit size, and that's basically saying to what. I'll say 3 inch. Hit OK. And it changed them all. Now again, I could nitpick this, so I could hit Control just like you would in Windows, whether you were in Excel or any other program. I could have just selected 1 and 4 or whichever just by doing a Control click instead of just broad stroking all of them, but for the purpose of today, I just picked them all. So now if I hit that plus sign, you can see everything that was associated with that size changed. So that's, again, just very powerful technique. Now let's do a little different extreme example here. Let's click this and confirm one more time. So I've got EMT in here. So let's say these couple feeders I have here were in a mechanical room, and someone then read the specs and said, well, everything in this room has to be rigid. It's okay everywhere else, but these specific feeders have to be rigid. Well, normally that would be a heavy lift, but we can do the same thing here with a little bit different technique. We can highlight these again. I'm just going to do all of them. Right click. This time I'm going to do change breakdowns and attributes. And I should have a rigid spec in here, which I do right here. So feeder RMC galvanized. I'm going to hit OK. And it's resolving anytime you see that. And then if I drop this down, you can see here anything associated with conduit, fittings, whatever, all switched from EMT to rigid. So again, I'll say The advantage to this is it is hard to find high quality, hardcore estimators anymore. So this opens you up to be able to work with less experienced people easier, because it does take out of the equation now, okay, say I hire a inexperienced estimator that at least can get the job done. He got the feeder from point A to point B. That's fine. But it does take out of the equation that if they make a mistake, do I necessarily care? Because with this system, even if an extreme case like that, where say he took these feeders off and they were all EMT like that, and I decide that they have to be rigid, I can cherry pick which ones I want to be rigid. So again, the example would be, if it just had to be a specific room, I could just find which ones were in that room. If it was a mechanical or electrical room and I had that rigid requirement, I could do that. And it takes no real effort. So that's one thing there. So the other thing you can do, let me go over a scenario. Let me hit this specification button here. Let me drag this over here, something that I did here. So one thing you can do, a lot of times you'll see the requirement where you can do copper up to one size. Usually it's like a number 2 or 1/0. It depends sometimes, but needless to say, you will see the arrangement where you can do copper up until a certain size and then aluminum once it gets a little larger. Now you can do scenarios like that as well. And you can see this spec that I have highlighted, and I would argue to say that I don't think you're going to accomplish something like that in Classic. And all these powers that we have in this database specifically, and that Anywhere can possess, I would say you'd be hard pressed finding that kind of ease of use anywhere else. The good news about this is, same as what we did with the rigid, you could do something like this after the fact. Even if somebody took off all the feeders and then say it was bid day and you had 2 hours to turn this bid in, and then you found a requirement like that, not a problem at all. And we'll actually demonstrate this here too. Let's toggle this. Well, let me open one to see which spec I have currently. Oh yes, so that is the rigid one we did. So I'll just swap it to that one that has both wire sizes or wire types. So I'm going to select all these again, right click them, do change attributes and breakdowns. I'm going to switch it to the spec that has the combo deal, so it's going to be THHN and aluminum. Now if I wanted to, I'm going to jump over here again one more time. So if I wanted to see where the cutoff was, I can easily do that. I can click on this spec. I can look for the building wire, which is right here. And this is how you would change this, and this is kind of the power of it. And you can select any wire size. So I have from number 14 to number 2 being copper, and then after number 2 to number 900 I have going to aluminum. And I can close that. So let's see if this is true. So here's aluminum for the 4/0, and then you can see my number 4, which is below the number 2. So the number 4 is copper, and that's just a real world scenario that it did exactly what I told it to. And again, which parameters you put in there are completely flexible. You could make all the sizes whatever. And this spec is in this default database. So that's the other issue with the out-of-the-box database. It's not going to have something like this, but people want to do stuff like this. It's already in here, so that's another advantage. And that is a great way to handle that. So think about this scenario again. You might not have the most experienced estimator in the world, but with this, it almost doesn't matter anymore because they don't have to control that anymore. All you have to make sure they do is take off the appropriate spec-driven feeder assembly. Once they do that, then you know you can do any of this stuff before, during, or after. It really doesn't matter at that point when this happens. It can be changed at any time, and that is huge. Even if they did it wrong, you can fix it. So let's go there. So I think we have another example here. So branch, here's another big one. The branch conduit or cable, this is another one that people ask about. This will do, I have this at 3/4 conduit currently. I could do the same thing here where I can right click this branch assembly here. I can update global variable, simply change the conduit size to the 3/8, which triggers the MC cable. And just that quick, I can go, which if you saw that prior, that used to be 3/4 inch conduit, now it's MC cable and all that. So for VE stuff, let's talk about this scenario real quick. So what I've done in the past, you don't even have to necessarily copy a job anymore when you have this kind of power at your fingertips. So what I'll do a lot of times is finish the job, and then if they want a VE to go to MC cable, I will change the devices like what we did earlier and just change those to 3/8 conduit, and then change any assemblies like this to 3/8 conduit. And then I just go to the final price and see what the price difference is. And then it's so easy to toggle these back and forth. There's no need to really make a second job just to get a change like that. So then once I look at the price with the MC cable, well, then I can just swap it all back to conduit. And then, because that's really all I was after was, well, what would it look like if I did this, get the price, and then move on. So you really don't have to overcomplicate things anymore. It's just a matter of highlighting a bunch of stuff, changing the settings, and you're done. So a lot more power for sure. And I do have another feeder spec here. So you can also change, I just didn't want to forget to mention this. If you look at my list here, I have a copper spec, I have a aluminum spec, and then the dual spec. So you can toggle between any and all. Now I will say there is an asterisk to this. There is an assembly up here, which is on the pad, this feeder by amps. It will calculate conduit and wire pretty much at the code level and resize said conduit and wire depending on whether you pick copper or aluminum. However, any of these other assemblies, like what I took off 1 through 4, it won't change that automatically. I can go in here and select all these and go to change breakdowns. I can select the all aluminum version, but if there's any changes in wire size or conduit size, I would have to either know what that was or calculate it and then change these sizes accordingly. But with that said, there's still a quick way to do that. You could keep using this update global variable and then change the wire size in bulk, the really anything, wire size, conduit size, ground size, it's all separate variables, and that's that. So still way easier. Yeah, and voltage drop with feeder by amps, I don't think this version has that. This is not the voltage drop version. So voltage drop is another one. You'd have to have a good idea on what you were looking at there. That's why that feeder by amps one, I'm not a huge fan of that because it doesn't really take that into consideration. So I would be more inclined to just deal with it the way down here and just kind of have those sizes already kind of calculated and then move on from there and just do that myself. But the flexibility is there. That's the biggest thing to remember. The flexibility is certainly there. Okay, so let's trudge down through a couple more of these. So that's feeders there. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, let's look at some of these duct banks. So our duct bank assembly here, this one's pretty involved. So we have a picture over there to the right. So lots of questions here. The major thing here is you have a lot of flexibility of sizes, and the big flexibility with this assembly is the ends, what you're doing coming up out of the ground or possibly not coming out of the ground. So you can say, I don't have a transition coming up out of the ground, I'm just putting a bell end, or perhaps you're dead ending it with a plug. You have that option. So lots of questions, excavation sizes, stuff like that. The important thing to remember here, just like what we were talking about, you certainly have lots of flexibility, and all of this stuff could be changed at any point in time. If an addendum came out and changed the size or amperage, whatever you want to call it, you can certainly change any of the sizes in bulk. So that's another huge advantage. I have made the bold comment that this assembly alone probably is worth this database altogether, because I have used this specific assembly a lot over the years, and it certainly served me well. It's very tried and true. Same thing applies with the duct bank as the feeder. You can do copper, aluminum swaps, whichever you want. So all these are ultra flexible in that regards. You could change the dual wire like what we did before if it had to be one certain thing for one size, and then if it changed at another size, you could certainly do that. So not an issue there. Let's go down through. We got some lighting devices here. Let's look at this pad. So on the receptacles, I used kind of the @ symbol to signify if it was a duplex, double duplex, stuff like that. On the switch pad, I use the $sign. That's pretty much the switch. So if you see $2 signs, that's 2 gang, so 2 switches. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. So same concept here. The takeoff pads have pretty much everything laid out in a pretty neat and uniform way. It's not too confusing looking, but most of the time you can get pretty much everything you need here. But that's typically the complaint with the folks that don't like the takeoff pads, is they'll say, well, the one thing I always need isn't on the pad. I don't want to go back and forth from the pad to the database anyway, so I'll just stay with the database, and that's fine. There's really, like I said earlier, nothing wrong with that per se. And then let's get into some systems here. So we do have like communications outlets here. So if we're doing data drops and stuff like that, also cable support like bridle rings and stuff like that to get what you need, J hooks. So that's kind of a COM pad there. And it's pretty much kitted out by each discipline or separate thing you would take off. So you can see here I don't really combine communications as a whole. So we've got a separate one for TV outlets. So then that allows you to review an estimate easier. So then if you print it out a review report, you're really looking at each segmented piece. So it's easy to follow, it's trackable, and it just makes it, again, easy to review because everything's not lumped together. But with that said, you are really buying into a strategy here. It's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't take it off this way, then you've got the garbage, and you're not going to get that flexibility that was really built into here. So I would say you would want to take it off pretty much how it's designed here, and then when you do go to review it, then you're all set. So let's look at some access control here. So all the usual suspects. And hopefully the advantage of this database can be seen in the respects that all this stuff really is ready to go. So from day one, you can pretty much do an estimate with this database because all of the things are broken out. Pretty much all the systems are covered. Pretty much anything you would run into, certainly at the utmost basic level, and some things on the extreme level, like I would argue, you are not going to find anything like that duct bank assembly in the default Accubid database. It's just not going to be anywhere near that complete or be that flexible. The one that comes out of the box is complete garbage. You can't control the stub up materials in the default one. It just gives you elbows, and I think they're just whatever the assembly says. So if you do PVC duct bank, it's just going to throw 2 PVC elbows in there to come up out of the ground. And see, that's my big beef with the default database, which sent me down the path of building this, because you can't just be that simplistic. There's so many variables at each end of that conduit run that you can't possibly just say, well, I'm going to just throw 2 elbows in there and call them PVC 40 and that's the end of that. It just doesn't work that way. Not in the real world, at least. So that's really the theme overall here. So I actually like this one too. So the empty raceway one. So even if you were just doing a general empty conduit system, like I'll give you an example. I think we got like an AV, yeah, the audio visual one, which really you'll notice this pad won't change because it is that pad. So that's kind of where I was going with this. The audio visual one is that empty raceway pad, because if you're just doing, conduits and back boxes and stuff like that for an example, an AV system like this, then again, here's everything you need. And the takeoff pad, I like them because this is a good example here. You've got your empty conduit, you've got empty underground conduits, you've got core drills, LBs, empty flex, an empty box with a stub up. You got wall sleeves, fire caulks, backboard, EMT or GRC nipples if you had to go through a wall or between panels. So typically, this is the theme. It's going to lay everything out that you need. And this is an advantage because then you don't have to go trudging through the database. And I know when I was coming up as an estimator, that was always the problem. You might know what you need, but you didn't know where the heck it was. And you spent, 10, 15 minutes trudging through all the folders in a database trying to figure out what to use. And then, God forbid, you found it. A lot of times in a database, there'll be several options. And that's really where the confusion starts. Then you don't know which one to pick. Well, do I pick this assembly? Or do I pick that assembly? And it's just confusing. And I never liked that path. So that's, again, how this got generated, just with that mindset that all the pads are already made. All the stuff that at least are within reason you would need are already on there. You don't have to go searching for them. And it just makes it a lot easier. And more accessible is the key phrase there. It's more accessible. It's not hidden. Nobody has to guess which assembly to use because it's right here. So let's go to, so we've got a nurse call one as well. That's pretty popular. So again, all the usual suspects, pole stations, bed stations, dome lights, all that stuff. Empty conduit stuff. We got a demolition version here. So this one's pretty busy, but you know, it's got everything that you would pretty much run into. Panels, transformers, fixtures, switches, devices, you name it. So that's that. Here's the grounding pad we kind of went through earlier. So this has got a lot of good stuff on it too. The obviously transformer grounding, but then it's got ground bars and different connections here, like the pipe ground. It's got just a green wire if you needed that, lugs, you know, whatever you need. Got some exothermics there. Then we got a ground loop pad, which this one, I like this one too. So any kind of outdoor grounding, we've got that covered. So we've got real two versions here, a ground loop and then a ground loop with ground rods as a count. So if you're going around the perimeter of a building, then every time you punked a point down, then it would count a ground rod. And I'd say that's the other advantage to this database specifically. It is built for live count. So anybody using Live Count Cloud that would want to do segment counts, that does work well with pretty much any assembly in here. So if you took this particular assembly over, it would count the loop wire as a length and then the ground rods as a count when you clicked. So that's a good point that I really didn't say as of yet, is just that these are built for not only general estimating flexibility, but also just live count flexibility. It is built to work how it works. All right, so let's go back up here. So the fire alarm is another one I like to just show. It's got labels up here at the top, so initiating devices, notification, and ancillary devices. So the theme here is much like inside that one assembly. It's guiding you. It's showing you labels, saying, okay, here's what this is, here's what these are. And again, it just kind of helps you get steered the right direction. And then you kind of know just out of the gate what's what. And especially between the label and the color coding, it just helps kind of segregate everything and just make more sense. So all the devices up top, down at the bottom, all the different raceway systems. This also, so an important fact to remind everybody here, these fire alarm devices and the conduit, I'd say this specific one that I'm pointing to here, the conduit or plenum. So the devices, let me start with those. They can be toggled between a plenum run install versus a hard piped, or I'd say a complete hard piped install. It's flexible either way. So if you counted all the devices, and then again somebody read the spec and said, no, you can't just stub up the conduit, put a bushing on the end of it, and then run free air cable. We got to run conduit the whole way. Well, even if you counted all the devices and it had the conduit stub up with the insulated bushing, you can swap that to be a full piped option. So the devices are flexible, just like the receptacles and all those going from MC cable and whatnot. The fire alarm can be toggled the same way. The conduit runs can be toggled as long as you use this top one here. It can be toggled from conduit or just cable. So the solution is available to you to go either way. Now, that said, these down below in this darker purple, they're just what they say. So these are just plenum assemblies here. These ones over here are just conduit. So that is an important thing to remember. Those are just all in pretty much. You're not going to take the conduit out and just put cable in these. Same with these two pink ones over here. Those are just cable. You're not going to just put conduit in there if you take them off. But this one up here is the flexible one. So if you used this one all the time, then you would always have that flexibility. So it kind of goes back to the garbage in, garbage out scenario. If you want ultimate flexibility with your horizontal runs and everything fire alarm related, then you would use this for all your connectivity. Okay. And I would say as far as the extension and the closeout, I'm sure a lot of people out there, you've probably seen maybe demonstrations of Anywhere, but the closeout is pretty much like Classic. So as far as this database, there's really no uniqueness to that. I haven't really groomed these areas too much. So this is really up for each company to decide what they want to put on these tabs. I will point out the one huge advantage over Classic with this Anywhere solution is you can allocate these labor tabs as far as incidental, labor factoring, labor escalation, and indirect labor. So Classic, and I don't believe that ever changed. I'm not aware if it has, but I know that always was true, that you could not allocate those labor tabs. So it was always very difficult to do something like a schedule values internally to Classic. You always had to go out to an external sheet because you always had to deal with these labor tabs some way, which you could never do again internally. So these ones you can, and that to me is a huge advantage because you can do a turnkey schedule values or break down and pretty much get whatever you need to get. I do have a default quote pad in here though. There is a quote pad that comes along for the ride here. So that's probably the only thing on these tabs that kind of gets pushed by the default. There's a bill of material that sits over here on this screen. And there are reports in here by default too. So there's all the normal reports like a bill of material, a review report. So that's probably a huge advantage too. The default reports out of the can of the default stuff that Trimble gives you are certainly not ideal. It's very difficult to get a turnkey solution out of what they give you. So I'd say here it's a little bit easier to get all the basic reports that you need. I'd say they look better, they certainly work better, and yeah, definitely a better solution. Okay, so let's go back over here. I think we covered everything here. We can look at some of these reports that are in here. So these are, like I said, we got some bill of material options in here, review reports. There's also a couple PCOs. There's an RFI report. All good solutions there. So just to give you a peek on those. And then let's see. So again, I would say you would have to set up any specific closeout stuff. So I'd say that still hugely lessens your overall implementation time. Because what you don't have to worry about is building all these assemblies, making the takeoff pads, and just doing all that kind of upfront work. Because I would say most companies that I've seen, it takes you anywhere. I'd say your best case scenario, if you were to build the assemblies that are all in this database, I mean, best case scenario, if maybe a miracle happened and all the stars aligned, 6 to 8 months. But typically, you're looking at a full year of somebody's time to do at least what's built here, because just the sheer magnitude of it. This has been built since about 2015, so I've had a pretty good jump on, finding all the bugs, tweaking things, getting them to work, and so just that sheer amount of time, it's just a long time to put into it. So I would say even if somebody spent a year developing a database like this, it still wouldn't be quite apples to apples to here. Just again, the sheer fact of that time that I've had logged into it since about, again, 2015. I think that's when this has started. All right, so we're approaching the hour here. I'll just keep it to an hour. I will say again, hit the subscribe button if you have any questions about the database or any of this stuff that we've talked about. Again, that's the advantage of the Discord. Join the Discord, join the LinkedIn page, and communicate with us there. And then as we go on, if people have questions and we do more of these live events, then we'll address all those specific questions, turn it into a tutorial session, whatever we want to gravitate to there. And also use the email up above the live presentation here. You can email that Anywhere database if you had any questions on the database itself, or any questions on the program or whatever. You can interact with us that way. So with that said, we'll wrap up for the evening. Thanks for joining, and hope to have everybody in the future. And again, join all the media links there, and come on in and communicate with us, and we'll do some collaborations and learn all this stuff together. So have a good night. Thank you.